Recently, many people have been mentioning the Euphrates River, with a tone full of anxiety. Some say it's a sign, others say it's a warning. The Euphrates have always been a boundary, between garden and desert, between life and instability, between order and chaos. I'm not sure how we should interpret this. Perhaps the question isn't whether the Euphrates are running out, but rather, what in human life is running out? If this reflection feels worth sitting with, you're welcome to stay. Like, subscribe, or share this space with someone you trust, not to chase answers, but to make space for questions that deserve time. We hear so much about the river Euphrates these days. Usually, the voices speaking about it are loud. They speak of timelines. They speak of the end. And I know, it can feel overwhelming. It can feel like we are standing on the edge of something we cannot control. But I would like to invite you to step back from the noise for a moment. Let's look at the riverbed, not as a clock counting down, but as a surface being revealed. There is a story, perhaps you've heard whispers of it, about what lies beneath those retreating waters. It is said that in the upper reaches, where the water has pulled back, thousands of stones have been found. Not jagged rocks, but smooth pebbles, stones that feel soft to the touch. Archaeologists call them covenant stones. In the ancient world, when two people wanted to make peace, or when a promise was made to end a conflict, they would sit together, and they would rub a stone until it was smooth. It was a labor of time, a labor of patience. For centuries, the water hid them, but now they are visible, thousands of small, quiet monuments to the human desire for peace. Some of the researchers who handled these stones said something unexpected, not about their age, not about their origin, but about how they felt holding them. One man said it reminded him of a promise he made to his brother decades ago, a promise he never fully kept. Nothing dramatic, just memories surfacing. And yet, the story goes deeper. Among these thousands of small stones, there is something else. At 4 distinct points along the river, they found 4 massive pillars, deeply buried. Unlike the small stones, these have no marks, no writing. They are just incredibly smooth. Reports say that if you stand near them, the world goes quiet, truly quiet. Within 10 meters of these pillars, the wind seems to stop. Birds do not sing. It is a heaviness that absorbs sound, a silence that feels like it is waiting. A local guide, someone who has lived by the river his entire life, said he stood there longer than he planned to. He didn't feel afraid. He said it felt more like being asked to slow down, like the land itself was saying, "Not yet." When I hear this, my mind goes to the Bible. I think of Joshua, who set up a stone to be a witness to the people's promise to God. And I think of the book of Revelation, and the 4 angels bound at the river Euphrates. We are often taught to fear those angels. We are told they are waiting to destroy. But looking at these silent pillars, I wonder if we might see it differently. What if they are not bound because they are evil, but because they are holding back the storm? What if this strange silence isn't a threat, but a form of mercy? Perhaps this is what theologians call divine restraint. The idea that God holds back the flow of history, not to trap us, but to give us space. Space to think. Space to breathe. It is easy to look at a drying river and see only judgment. But I wonder if we are being shown a picture of patience. Those 4 pillars, standing in absolute stillness, they might be reminding us that God is the master of the pause. He holds the timeline. He holds the wind. And the thousands of small stones around them? They quietly leave us with a question. What about the promises we have made? The covenants with our neighbors? The quiet vows we made to God in our youth? The water has receded. And now, those promises are visible again. And perhaps that is where we need to linger for a moment. Because, when promises resurface, when time seems to slow, the next question is not what will happen. It is how people choose to live while they wait. Further downstream, beneath layers of silt and memory, the river reveals something else. Not stones this time. Not pillars. Something surprisingly fragile. Archaeologists describe stumbling upon the ruins of a city that appears in no history books. It is a ghost city. Yes. But what stopped the researchers in their tracks wasn't gold, or weapons, or high walls. It was the homes. Inside the crumbling walls of these ancient houses, they found a pattern. In every main room, there is a small hollow, a niche carved into the wall. And inside each niche sits a clay oil lamp, and every single one of them is facing east. Now, usually when we find ruins, we find signs of chaos. We see the scars of battle, or fire, or sudden earthquake. But here, there is no sign of war. There is no disorder. It appears the people of this city didn't flee in panic. They left on purpose. Everything was in order, and chemical analysis of the lamps shows traces of olive oil. It suggests that before they walked out the door for the last time, they lit these lamps. They weren't fleeing the darkness. They were leaving a light on, facing east, facing the dawn, as if they were expecting someone or something to return. It brings to mind the parable Jesus told, the story of the 10 young women waiting for the bridegroom. We often hear that story preached with a sense of panic. Do you have enough oil? Are you running out? But when I look at this silent city under the river, I don't feel panic. I feel a sense of profound, quiet dedication. These people lived with a posture of expectation. They understood that life is not just about what we build or what we conquer. It is about who we are waiting for. I don't think everything needs an explanation. There are images that just want to remain in silence. In our world today, we don't like to wait. We have forgotten the art of it. We fill every silent moment with noise, with scrolling, with activity. We are terrified of the dark, so we fill it with artificial light. But this buried city asks us a gentle question. In the midst of all this modern noise, is there a lamp burning in the niche of your heart? Not a roaring fire of activity, just a small, steady flame, the kind that says, I haven't forgotten, the kind that looks toward the east, not with fear of the end, but with hope for a new beginning. Perhaps the river drying up isn't just exposing the past. Perhaps it is exposing our need for that kind of focus again. To be awake, to be watchful, not because we are afraid of the dark, but because we know the light is coming. Maybe today, you can find a quiet moment to trim the wick of your own soul, to turn your face toward the dawn, and simply wait. You don't have to be loud to be ready. You just have to be there, and if you are there, if you stay long enough to look past the emptiness, you might see the most surprising thing of all. We have spoken of the stones, and the silence, and the lamps. But now, reports are coming in of something else, something that shouldn't be there. While the massive, roaring current of the main river has vanished, tiny veins of water have begun to appear. They are seeping up from the oldest, deepest cracks in the bedrock. This water is not like the muddy river that used to flow here. It is crystal clear, pure, and strangely, it doesn't try to flow downstream to the sea. It soaks right back into the earth, as if it is feeding the ground itself. Botanists are finding something incredible around these damp spots. But not modern weeds. These are ancient species plants that were thought to be extinct for centuries. Life is returning, not from the rain above, but from the deep below. Geographers have looked at the coordinates of these springs. They sit right on the fault lines that some believe marked the boundaries of the original garden. The Garden of Eden. It sends our minds back to the very first pages of the Bible. Genesis tells us that a river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided. The Euphrates was one of those branches. For thousands of years, we have known the Euphrates as a boundary, a trade route, a source of conflict. But perhaps, underneath all that history, it never forgot where it came from. I wonder if this is a picture for us. We live in a time when the main rivers of our lives feel like they are drying up. The institutions, the culture, the financial security. When they recede, we feel exposed. We feel dry. But this phenomenon suggests a different perspective. Maybe the drying up isn't the end. Maybe it is the only way to reveal the ancient springs. When the surface noise is gone, the original source can finally break through. This is the promise of restoration. Not that the old world will simply start running again just as it was, but that we might return to our origin. Jesus spoke of living water that springs up from within. Water that doesn't depend on the rain, water that doesn't depend on the economy or the news cycle. The riverbed is inviting us to ask, when the external flow stops, do you know where your deep spring is? Is your soul connected to a source that is older than your problems? Perhaps we are not witnessing a death, but a return. A return to the beginning. A return to the garden within. And if we are quiet enough to find that garden, we might finally hear the wind. The receding water has unveiled one last mystery. Deep limestone caves, hidden for ages, are now open to the air. And as the desert wind blows through these hollow chambers, it creates a sound. You might expect the wind in a cavern to howl or to scream, but witnesses say this is different. It sounds like a hum, like a chord. Nature itself has formed a kind of pipe organ in the deep places of the earth, playing a low, constant harmony. But the sound is only half the story. The people who stand in the draft of this wind report a strange sensation. The desire to argue fades away. The frustration of trying to explain oneself disappears. For a moment, in that resonance, they claim they can understand one another without words. The barriers of language, the walls of suspicion we build around our hearts, seem to dissolve. It is a moment of pure, unforced connection. The Bible tells us about the Tower of Babel. It was a moment in history when humanity was scattered. Our languages were confused because our pride had grown too tall. We stopped understanding each other. But here, in the lowly places, in the bottom of the dry river, I wonder if we are seeing a reversal of Babel. Not a climbing up to the heavens, but a going down to the depths. And in the depths, we find unity again. It makes me wonder about the noise of our daily lives. Maybe our constant talking, our debating, our posting, maybe that is just the sound of the rushing river. And now that the river has stopped, we are left with the silence. And in that silence, we hear the breath. In the ancient Hebrew scriptures, the word for spirit, and the word for wind, and the word for breath are all the same word, ruach. Perhaps, when the flow of the world stops, we finally begin to hear the language of the soul. We return to that first moment in Genesis, when the dust was formed, and God breathed, and man and God walked together in the cool of the day. The Euphrates is drying up. The world is changing, but we do not need to be afraid. Because what is being revealed is not a monster. It is a reminder of the covenant, a reminder to keep our lamps burning, a reminder of the living water within, and a reminder of the breath that connects us all. Maybe the emptiness is actually an invitation to come home, and if we look at the ground beneath our feet, it seems some have already started the journey. On the drying surface of the river, a new phenomenon has been observed. Footprints. Thousands of them. They are appearing in the soft clay, pressing down into the history of the earth. But there is something strange about the direction. Usually, when water runs out, people flee toward the banks. They run toward the sea. But these tracks? Every single one of them is facing upstream. They are walking against the current of history. They are walking toward the source, toward the ancient location of the garden. Witnesses say the tracks appear slowly, rhythmically. It is not a stampede of panic. It looks like a procession, like an invisible army, or perhaps a family, quietly walking home. And those who have dared to step out onto the mud, to place their own feet inside these ancient impressions, report a sudden shift in their hearts. The moment they align their path with these tracks, the anger drains away. The need to be right vanishes. They feel an overwhelming compulsion to forgive. In the Greek New Testament, the word for repentance is metanoia. We often think it means feeling guilty or ashamed, but literally, it just means to turn around, to change your mind, to realize you were walking away from life, and simply turn back. It reminds me of the story Jesus told, the son who took his inheritance and went far away. When he hit rock bottom, when his own personal river ran dry, he didn't just sit there, he stood up, and he began the long walk back to his father's house. We spend so much of our lives building armor. We build walls of pride, of success, of I am right. But you cannot walk upstream carrying all that weight. The riverbed is narrow. The way is humble. The drying of the Euphrates isn't a sign that God has left. It is a sign that He has cleared the road. He has removed the water so that there is finally a path for us to walk on, a path of mercy. These tracks don't lead to a destination, but to a beginning. They are an invitation to walk backward through our own history, shedding our armors and our pride, until we find the path that leads back to the Father's gate. The road is open, the direction is clear. Perhaps it is time to turn around, and if you do, if you wait until the sun goes down, you will see why the river had to dry up. Reports describe a final, beautiful mystery. As the darkness covers the land, the empty bed of the Euphrates begins to glow. It is not water returning, it is light. A soft, phosphorescent blue stream, flowing silently along the ancient path. It moves with the grace of a river, but it carries no mud. It carries no debris. They call it the transparent current. And the wonder of this light is not just that it glows, it is what happens when you look into it. When you look into a normal river, you see your reflection, but it is distorted by ripples and mud. But looking into this stream of light, witnesses say, you see yourself. But not the you that is tired, not the you that carries shame, or regret, or anxiety. You see your image as it was meant to be, pure, unblemished. You see the version of yourself that exists in the mind of God. Theology speaks of a day when we will no longer see through a glass darkly, but face to face. Perhaps the Euphrates has become a spiritual mirror, a place of purification. The material water, the water of commerce, of borders, of conflict, had to evaporate. Why? To make room for the water of truth. The physical world has stepped aside so that the spiritual reality can finally be seen. We spend so much time mourning what we have lost. We look at the dry places in our lives and we call them disasters. But consider this. We haven't lost a river. We have been given a mirror. We are being invited to stop looking at the chaos of the world and instead look into the stream of God's light. To remember who we are, to find the face we lost when we wandered away from the garden. The mud is gone. The noise is gone. Only the light remains. As you stand on the edge of your own changes, of your own dry seasons, don't be afraid of the emptiness. Look deeper. There is a light flowing there, waiting to show you who you truly are. The river is not dead. It has just turned into light. Observers are noticing something remarkable on the valley floor. 4 distinct bands of color, running side by side, stretching endlessly along the river's path: gold, silver, copper red, and deep black. It looks as though 4 invisible streams are flowing beneath the surface, each carrying a different weight, a different history. They say the ground feels different here. If you stand on the silver-white band, a profound sense of peace washes over you, a stillness like a mountain lake. But step onto the red earth, and the feeling changes. You feel a pulse, a heartbeat, an urgency to act, to move, to do good. And local legends are already whispering about the places where these bands touch the intersections. They say if you listen closely at those crossing points, you don't hear wind, you hear a hum, like a choir singing a song that feels older than the stones themselves, a song about how the world began and how it will be made new. It brings us back to the scriptures. We read in Revelation about 4 angels bound at the Euphrates. We often view them with terror, as agents of chaos, but perhaps we can see them differently today. What if they represent the 4 corners of creation? The 4 winds of heaven? The Euphrates is unique. It flows in the first chapters of Genesis, watering the Garden of Eden, and it flows in the final chapters of Revelation, preparing the way for the end of the age. It is a circle, a loop of time that is finally closing. The convergence of these colors suggests that history is not falling apart. It is coming together. The gold of glory, the white of purity, the red of sacrifice, the black of mystery. They are all merging into one singular purpose. The physical river, the water that carried ships and mud, has dried up. Why? Perhaps to make room for the current of destiny. The temporary things are fading so that the eternal things can be seen. It reminds us that our lives are rivers too. We have our seasons of fullness and our seasons of drought. But even when we feel dry, the current of God's purpose is still flowing beneath the surface. We are not flowing toward nothingness. We are flowing toward a gathering, toward a reunion with the source of all rivers. The water is gone. The path is ready. We are just walking each other home. Everything returns to where it began. And maybe that is the best news of all. It may be worth resting in that promise for a while. In a world that screams for attention, silence is the most radical act of faith we can offer. We live in an era of noise. Everywhere we turn, we are met with urgency. We are told that the sky is falling, that the signs are aligning, and that if we do not panic, we are not paying attention. The river Euphrates, that ancient winding ribbon of history, has become a focal point for this anxiety. For many, its drying bed is a countdown clock, a trigger for fear, a headline of doom. But we are not here to decode the world. We are here to help you inhabit it fully, deeply, and with a wakeful heart. We do not believe that faith needs to be loud to be real. We do not believe that mystery exists to be exploited for views, nor that theology is meant to control our fears. Theology, at its best, should soothe them. So, let us take a breath. Let us step away from the podiums and the predictions. Let us sit down, side by side, on the banks of this metaphorical river, and look at what has truly been revealed. Not the end of the world, but the beginning of a return. When the waters of the Euphrates receded in our journey, the first thing they revealed was not a monster, but a memory. We spoke of the covenant stones, thousands of smooth, hand-polished pebbles hidden in the riverbed. They reminded us that beneath the currents of conflict, there is a deep, human history of making peace. They asked us a simple question: what promises have you made that the noise of life has drowned out? Then, we saw the silent pillars, 4 massive stones that absorbed sound, creating a sanctuary of stillness in a chaotic world. While the world rushed to interpret them as agents of destruction, we chose to see them as divine restraint. This is a core value of how we view God, not as a destroyer waiting to strike, but as a father holding back the storm, giving us space to think, space to breathe, space to turn around. We chose calm over control. Instead of using these images to terrify you into belief, we used them to invite you into rest. We believe that God is the master of the pause, and in that pause, we found the city of lamps. Imagine those clay vessels, buried in the mud, all facing east. They still held traces of oil. The people who left them didn't flee in panic. They left in expectation. They lit a light for the return of the beloved. This challenges us. In our modern rush, we have forgotten the art of waiting. We mistake anxiety for preparedness. But these lamps teach us that true readiness is a quiet heart. It is a small flame that refuses to go out, even when the night is long. As we looked deeper into the dry bed, we realized that the drying up of the external flow was necessary for the internal flow to begin. We discovered the living veins, pure, crystal-clear water, seeping up from the fault lines of Eden. This aligns with our belief in depth over drama. The drama is the drying river. The depth is the ancient spring. When the institutions of our world, our financial security, our social status, our cultural dominance begin to dry up, it feels like a disaster. But it is actually an unveiling. It forces us to ask, is my soul fed by the rain that falls from the news cycle, or by the spring that bubbles up from the spirit? And from those deep places came the wind of understanding. The limestone caves that turned the wind into a harmonious hum, dissolving the barriers of language and pride. This is the reversal of Babel. We live in a time of extreme division. We shout, we type, we argue. We want to be right more than we want to be connected. But the riverbed invited us to stop talking and start listening. We value humanity before doctrine. Before we are debaters, we are brothers. Before we are theologians, we are children of the same breath. When the noise stops, we remember that we belong to one another. Finally, the vision shifted from what we see to where we are going. We saw the footprints in the mud, a procession of invisible travelers walking upstream, back toward the source, back toward the garden. This is the heart of our message. Reflection over reaction. The world reacts by running away from the problem. The Spirit reflects by walking toward the solution. Repentance isn't a punishment. It is a homecoming. It is the prodigal son, realizing that the pig pen is not his destiny. It is the act of stepping into those footprints, shedding our armor, and walking backward through our history to find the Father's gate. And as the sun set, we saw the transparent current. The river turned to blue phosphorescent light, acting as a mirror of truth. Here, we embrace humility over certainty. We don't have a map of the future. We don't have a timeline, but we have a mirror. We can look into the light of God and see who we really are, cleansed, loved, and known. The physical river had to vanish, so the spiritual reality could be seen. And finally, the convergence of the four, the bands of gold, silver, red, and black. The realization that history is a circle, flowing from Eden to Revelation, closing the loop. We are not dangling over the edge of a cliff. We are completing a cycle, We are moving toward a meeting place. Why have we taken you on this journey? Why tell these stories in this way? Because we believe there is a better way to speak about faith in the 21st century. We observe a landscape where every headline is weaponized to create engagement through fear. We see spiritual influencers claiming to hold the keys to the apocalypse. We see good people, thoughtful people, feeling overwhelmed and anxious, wondering if God is angry or if they are missing the signs. We choose a different path. We are like a pastor who has lived through enough storms to know that screaming at the thunder doesn't help. We speak slowly, not because we are unsure, but because we respect you too much to rush you. So, as we conclude this series of reflections on the Euphrates, we leave you not with a warning, but with a blessing. The river of your life may feel dry today. The structures you relied on may be crumbling. The noise of the world may be deafening. But look closer. There are stones of covenant holding you up. There are lamps of hope waiting to be lit. There is a spring of living water beneath your feet, and there is a path, marked by the footprints of grace, leading you gently home. We do not promise to give you all the answers. The world is too big, and God is too great for our small minds to contain. But we promise to be with you in the question. We promise to sit with you on the bank of the river, to watch for the light, and to remind you again and again that you are loved, held, and guided. Everything returns to the source, and maybe, just maybe, it may be worth sitting with that peace for a while. The house is finally quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes after the dishwasher has stopped hum, the emails have ceased their pinging, and the demands of the world have retreated into the shadows. I am tired not just physically, but a deep, marrow-level exhaustion. It is the fatigue of living in a world that is constantly shouting. I sit on the edge of the sofa, the blue light of my phone illuminating the darkness. My thumb hovers over the screen. Usually, this is the time I doom scroll. I check the headlines. I look for the latest crisis. I feed the low-level anxiety that has become the background noise of my spiritual life. But tonight, I choose something different. I click on a video from a channel that promised me nothing. No dates, no warnings, just a space to sit. The video begins. There is no jarring intro music, no flashing graphics urging me to subscribe now. Just a slow, panning shot of a dry riverbed bathed in golden light. And then, a voice. It is a voice that sounds like it has weathered storms. It is low, slow, and undeniably kind. It doesn't speak at me. It speaks near me, like a friend sitting in the other armchair. We hear so much about the river Euphrates these days. The voice says gently, but let's look at the riverbed, not as a clock counting down, but as a surface being revealed. My shoulders drop an inch. I didn't realize I was holding them so high. As the narrative unfolds, I am taken back to the river. But instead of the usual apocalyptic imagery of dried-up water signaling war, the narrator shows me covenant stones. I see the hands of ancient people smoothing pebbles to make peace. The narrator invites me to wonder, what promises have been uncovered in your own life? I pause. I look away from the screen. I think about the promise I made to myself years ago to be more present, a promise I let get buried under the silt of busyness. The video isn't making me afraid of the future. It is making me thoughtful about my past. The video flows on. I see 4 pillars standing in the silence. The narrator suggests that God is the master of the pause, that this stillness is a mercy, not a threat. For the first time in years, I don't feel the need to rush my theology. I don't feel the pressure to have an opinion on the end times. I just feel the weight of the silence, and strangely, it feels like a warm blanket. Then comes the image of the city of lamps. The buried homes, the oil lamps facing east. The narrator asks, "Is there a lamp burning in the niche of your heart?" Tears prick my eyes. Not tears of fear, but of longing. I realize how much I have missed the simple act of waiting. Not waiting in terror for a disaster, but waiting in hope for a sunrise. I think of the living veins, the water bubbling up from the deep cracks, watering ancient seeds. I realize my own soul has felt dry, cracked like that mud. And yet, this content isn't telling me I'm doomed. It's telling me that the source is still there, deep beneath the surface, waiting for the noise to stop so it can break through. As I watch, something shifts inside me. It is a physical sensation of unclenching. I realize that for so long, my faith has been defensive. I have treated the Bible like a rule book for survival or a code to be cracked. I have approached God with my armor on, bracing for the next blow. But here, in this quiet digital space, I am invited to take the armor off. I see the footprints in the mud on the screen, the invisible procession walking upstream, back toward the garden. The road is open, the voice says. Perhaps it is time to turn around. I close my eyes. I imagine myself stepping into those footprints. I feel a sudden, overwhelming desire to let go of my need to be right, my need to control the narrative, my resentment toward the culture. I feel the wind of understanding that hum from the limestone caves, blowing through my own mind, dissolving the babble of my daily arguments. I don't agree with every single poetic interpretation in the video. And the amazing thing is, I know the creator doesn't require me to. There is no dogma being hammered into me. There is space for my doubt. There is space for my maybe. I feel respected. My intellect isn't being bypassed to get to my emotions. My soul is being addressed directly. The video concludes with the river of light, the phosphorescent blue stream acting as a mirror of truth, and the four colored bands converging into a single destiny. We are just walking each other home, the narrator says. The screen fades to black. The video ends. I sit in the silence of my living room. The hum of the refrigerator kicks back in, but the internal noise is gone. I don't immediately click on the next video. I put the phone down. I sit with the feeling. It feels like ownership. For a long time, my faith felt like something that was happening to me, a series of reactions to external events. But now, I feel like I am holding it again. It feels heavier, but in a good way. Solid, grounded. I realize I am looking at the world differently. Tomorrow, when I read the news about conflict or climate or politics, I know I won't react with the same spike of adrenaline. I will see the drying rivers of our institutions not as the end of the story, but as the clearing of the path. I will look for the covenant stones. I will listen for the silence. I have found a language for my inner life that I didn't know I had lost. I have moved from the red band of urgency to the white band of peace. I stand up and walk to the window. The street outside is dark. The world is still chaotic. The river is still drying. But I am not afraid. I place a hand on my chest, feeling the steady rhythm of my own heart, my own small lamp, facing east. I am awake. I am waiting. And for the first time in a very long time, I am home.
Country's water reserves have dropped to their lowest level in 80 years.
Something unbelievably strange just happened at the Euphrates River. and it's got both scientists and prophecy watchers on edge. This disturbance has stirred along this ancient waters, woven not into the affairs of men, but into the very bones of creation itself. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. Psalm 46:4. And yet, what we are witnessing at the Euphrates feels like the earth whispering a solemn counterpoint, an omen rising from a land already heavy with prophecy. Across the Middle East, the signs have been gathering quietly, winds shifting in strange directions, desert sands moving as if under some unseen pulse, nights growing unusually still, then suddenly trembling with distant rumbles that leave no trace. Even the wildlife creatures, hardened by centuries of harsh terrain, have begun acting with a restlessness that seasoned shepherds and nomads cannot explain. The valleys feel tighter. The air feels charged. The old riverbeds, normally hushed and predictable, seem to be listening. If we truly believe that the Lord commands the mountains and the seas, then we cannot shrug off what creation is doing now. For long before God judged empires, he often shook the land beneath their feet. And long before he spoke to kings, he stirred the rivers and the winds as heralds of his approach. And perhaps this is such a moment, because the land itself seems to be crying out. The soil that once bore empires now groans under drought. The sun scorches harder each year. Storms carve through deserts in ways no elder can remember. Even the night sky feels different, quiet in one breath, trembling in the next. These are not the motions of chance. These are the tremors of a world waiting for its maker. If my heart were as attentive as it ought to be, I would stand like a watchman on the ridge and call out to anyone who will listen. Do not ignore the voice of creation, for the question rising from these ancient landscapes is the same one that now rises to us. Will we recognize the signs from God? And if, as you listen, something inside you begins to echo with these signs, if the stirring of the Euphrates feels less like distant news and more like a question addressed to your own spirit, then walk with this message a little further. Let your voice answer what your heart already knows. Tell us in the comments whether this truth is calling you. If it is, write, "With you is the fountain of life." For those who watch and discern, this may be the hour to stand together and keep listening. Because tonight, creation's whisper has turned into a shout, and all of it leads to one astonishing truth. The Euphrates itself has begun to behave in ways no one can explain. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what happened at this ancient river, what was hidden, how it was found, what this occurrence revealed, and why this situation, at this precise moment in history, is one of the clearest and most ignored prophetic signs that we are living in the final generation. Let me give you the full historical context, because without understanding this, you won't grasp the magnitude of what is happening right now. Long before the Euphrates became a fault line of modern prophecy, it was already intertwined with the story of God's people. The 12 tribes of Israel, descendants of Jacob's sons, did not only shape the land of Canaan, their history spilled far beyond its borders, stretching deep into the regions we now call Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. These lands formed the backdrop of empires that rose, conquered, scattered, and reshaped the fate of the tribes. When the kingdom of Israel divided after Solomon's death, 10 tribes formed the northern kingdom. And when Assyria rose to power, it was from the very soil between the Tigris and the Euphrates that its armies swept westward. Samaria fell, and the Assyrians did what they were known for. They deported whole populations, scattering them across the vast territories of Mesopotamia. 2 Kings 17 describes how the exiles were taken to places like Halah, Gozan, and regions along the Habor River tributaries that feed into the same ancient river systems tied to the Euphrates. Here, in the shadow of the great Mesopotamian rivers, the 10 northern tribes slowly disappeared from recorded history. They were absorbed into cultures that lived along the trade routes, mountain passes, and fertile valleys between modern Syria, Iraq, and southeastern Turkey. For centuries, whispers of them resurfaced along this very region, in pockets of Kurdistan, in remote villages along the Turkish highlands, in communities near old Assyrian routes, where oral traditions still speak of ancestors who once kept the God of Israel's ways. The Euphrates Basin, once the heart of empires, became the resting place of the tribe's forgotten footsteps. And yet Scripture insisted their story was not finished. Isaiah 11 promised that God would one day gather his scattered people from Assyria and from the far reaches of the ancient Near East. Ezekiel spoke of the tribes being reunited, not only Judah returning from Babylon, but the lost tribes, those carried eastward toward the Euphrates and beyond. For generations, this sounded impossible. But modern discoveries, Jewish practices preserved in Kurdish enclaves, faint Hebrew echoes in tribal customs across northern Syria and Iraq, and genetic hints of Middle Eastern ancestry in unexpected places have revived the conversation. The lands around the Euphrates are not just geopolitical flashpoints. They are living archives of a story thousands of years old. And this is what matters for us now. Because when the earth trembles along the Euphrates, when the river behaves in ways no scientist can easily explain, it does not happen in a vacuum. It happens on a stage layered with ancient exile, divine prophecy, forgotten tribes, and the long arc of God's dealings with nations. The Euphrates has always carried more than water. It carries memory. It carries warning. It carries prophecy. And tonight, as reports of a strange, unexplainable disturbance rise from that ancient river, we must remember. This region has been speaking for thousands of years, and it is speaking again. Something astonishing has taken place along the Euphrates, something that defies every natural pattern the region has ever known. Just days ago, a violent hailstorm, the largest in recent memory, hammered the valleys of southeastern Turkey and northern Syria. Witnesses said the stones were the size of a man's fist, pounding the ground until the riverbanks overflowed. Water levels surged so high that local authorities warned nearby villages to evacuate low-lying areas. But then, without warning, the river that had swollen with icy torrents began to shrink, and shrink, and shrink, until, after only a handful of nights, the Euphrates, the great river spoken of in Scripture, lay exposed like a skeleton, its stone ribs visible under the morning sun. Scientists are baffled. Hydrologists insist a drop this sudden is not hydrologically possible without a massive upstream diversion. Yet no dam opened, no reservoir collapsed, no engineering mishap has been reported. One shepherd in the Kobani region said, "The water ran like a flood at sunset. By dawn, it was gone. The river vanished, as if someone pulled it underground." A farmer near Al-Thawra said, "I have lived by this river for 70 years. It rises slowly. It recedes slowly. But this was like watching the earth swallow it." What makes this even more unsettling is how closely it echoes ancient language. Scripture speaks of God drying rivers as signs of divine intervention. He turned the sea into dry land. They passed through the waters on foot. Psalm 66:6. Isaiah declared, "The Lord will utterly dry up the tongue of the sea of Egypt." Isaiah 11:15. And Revelation speaks plainly of the great river Euphrates, drying to prepare the way for events far beyond human control. It is as if nature itself has stepped back, leaving a silence heavy enough to feel. And while many see only drought or coincidence, others are beginning to whisper, "Is this a sign? A warning? A doorway opening to something deeper?" because the drying of the Euphrates, dramatic as it is, may only be the outer layer of a far more profound mystery. And what lies beneath that cracked riverbed is the next meaning we must now confront. Before we continue, pause with me for a moment and listen to what your own spirit is doing as these ancient patterns unfold. If something in this story that suddenly speaks again resonates with you, then stay close. Let your presence here become part of the watchfulness this hour requires. And if this journey is stirring you, let it show. Share this message so others can discern with us. Subscribe so you don't lose the next turn in this unfolding trail. And add your voice in the comments. When the Euphrates dried and its ancient stones were exposed, a team of geologists was sent to investigate the baffling collapse in water levels. Their mission was simple: determine whether underground fissures had opened or if seismic events had silently redirected the river. But what they found was something no scientific instrument had prepared them for. Near a stretch of riverbed south of the Turkish border, the ground gave way to a narrow opening, too sharply angled, too perfectly aligned to be the product of natural erosion. When the team descended, their cameras revealed a passageway carved with clear human intention: smooth walls, symmetrical support beams fashioned from ancient timber, stonework cut with precision tools long lost to memory. One geologist reported, "This isn't a cave. It's a corridor. Someone built this, and they built it to last." The tunnel stretched nearly 60 meters before widening into a chamber sealed off from the world for millennia. Inside, sediment layers showed no sign of collapse or intrusion, meaning this entire structure had been hidden beneath the Euphrates for possibly thousands of years, preserved by the river that had silently flowed above it. But the most astonishing discovery was what lay beyond the chamber: a burial complex, an altar platform, and what appears to be a sacrificial table. Not pagan, not Assyrian, not Babylonian. The markings were unmistakably Hebrew. Stone inscriptions carried remnants of Paleo-Hebrew letters, patterns consistent with Levitical priestly iconography. Lyres, oil vessels, palm motifs, priestly hands raised in blessing were found etched into the walls. A few bronze fragments bore symbols associated with the Kohanim. The priestly line descended from Aaron. This forced historians to confront a startling possibility. The Levites, Israel's priestly tribe, once operated at this very site. Why would those who belonged to the service of the tabernacle and temple men, who were set apart to minister before the Lord, Deuteronomy 10-8, travel this far northeast, deep into territory never recorded as part of their inheritance? Why here? Near the Euphrates? Why underground? Why hidden? The Levites stand apart in Israel's story. They were not given land. The Lord himself was their portion. Numbers 18:20. Their mission was holy: to guard the sanctuary. Numbers 1:53, teach the law, 2 Chronicles 17-8, offer sacrifices, Leviticus 1:7, and sing praises before the presence of God, 1 Chronicles 15:16. They were the backbone of Israel's worship, its spiritual guardians. So, what were they guarding here? One archaeologist wrote in his preliminary report, "The architecture and ritual objects suggest not a common shrine, but a sanctum of high importance, possibly a refuge for priestly activity during national upheaval." Some inscriptions bore fragments consistent with texts used during times of exile and dispersion. Psalmic phrases such as, "How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land?" were faintly etched on a stone tablet. One wall displayed a stylized depiction of a river dividing into 4 streams, an unmistakable reference to Eden, Genesis 2:10, yet carved in a manner linking the Euphrates directly to sacred memory. Another scholar noted the eerie timing. Why did this site remain sealed until now, until the river dried? And why does it surface right when geopolitical and spiritual tensions around the Euphrates are peaking again? Indeed, Scripture mentions the Euphrates repeatedly as a boundary of promise and as a stage for divine judgment. The Lord made a covenant. To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. Genesis 15. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up. Revelation 16:12. The discovery does not feel accidental. It feels timed, measured, allowing a hidden chapter of Israel's priesthood to speak again. And so we are left with unsettling questions. What were the Levites doing here? What were they preparing for? Why build a sanctuary beneath a river God himself would one day dry? And why has this site emerged now of all times, when the world is trembling on the edge of prophetic fulfillment? Because if this is only the second layer, what lies beneath may shake us far more than the stones of the Euphrates ever could. Yet as the survey teams pressed deeper into the tunnel past the hand-hewn cuts in the stone, each mark revealing the rhythm of ancient labor, they began uncovering things that no longer belonged merely to the realm of archaeology. Along the left wall, they found inscriptions carved in a script resembling Proto-Hebrew, but with variations so unusual that the linguists in Shanghai and Jerusalem described them as ritual seal markings, the kind used only in contexts of containment, purification, or the isolation of something deemed dangerously unclean. What disturbed the researchers most was the architecture of the chamber at the end of the corridor. It followed the pattern of a Levitical lock chamber. 4 stone pillars placed at the corners, each bound once, though now decayed by forged copper ties. Even in their corroded state, the metal fibers were stretched so tightly that metallurgists concluded they had once been under enormous strain. In the center stood a basalt altar table, its surface engraved with the symbol of an eye, in a motif, repeatedly associated with Levitical watchkeeping duties recorded in Numbers 3, where the sons of Levi were appointed as guardians of sacred boundaries. Reports flowed in from every scientific team working on site. One of the pillars bore scorch marks, not from ordinary fire, but from an internal thermal surge, according to the thermal scanner report. An infrasound vibration emanated from a cavity in the eastern wall, inaudible to human ears, but registered clearly by scientific instruments. And on the north end of the chamber, scratched deeply into the stone, was a haunting line in archaic Hebrew, translated as, "Here lie those who were cast down." The moment historians read these words, one scripture surged to the forefront, long taken as symbolic, yet now echoing with alarming literalness. The 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates, Revelation 9:14. This led specialists from Hebrew University to propose a stunning hypothesis. The Levites, especially the Kohanic priestly line, entrusted with purification, sacrifice, and the maintenance of holiness, may have conducted a binding ritual here, not upon men, but upon fallen beings. They linked the chamber to 2 Peter 2:4. For if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into pits of darkness, reserved for judgment. And also to Jude 1:6, angels who did not keep their own domain, He has kept in eternal chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Layer upon layer, the evidence formed a picture too coherent to dismiss. A man-made subterranean chamber, 4 binding pillars corresponding to the 4 bound angels. Ritual architecture used only by Levitical priest guardians. Signs of recent loosening, ruptured copper ties, heat bursts, structural vibrations, a scriptural claim that such beings were restrained in a specific geographical region. And above all, a global phenomenon that shook the modern world. The Euphrates River drying, cracked, barren its waters retreating further than at any point in recorded history. Suddenly, the words of Revelation thundered with new force. For the four angels who had been prepared for the hour, day, month, and year were released to kill a third of mankind. Revelation 9:15. The implications were staggering. If the ancient priests had indeed sealed away entities of the pre-flood rebellion, if the drying of Euphrates signaled the expiration of that confinement, if the chamber beneath held the remnants of the first rupture, then the world was not merely witnessing climate change, nor the chance uncovering of an archaeological site, but the slow unsealing of a judgment long prophesied. Yet, according to ancient Hebraic tradition, when a seal breaks, it is never merely the end of something, it is the beginning of something else. Which leads scholars to the most unsettling question raised in the closed-door symposium just last week. Was Euphrates truly the final prison of the fallen, or merely the first gate? And if this is only the initial seal to break, then where are the others still buried beneath the dust of forgotten ages waiting for their appointed hour? Something has shifted in Jerusalem tonight. A tragedy that no one saw coming. The reports out of Jerusalem began just after dawn, though the earth itself had spoken long before any human voice. At 4:14 a.m., while the city still rested beneath its veil of darkness, a sudden tremor rolled beneath the foundations of the Temple Mount, sharp, deliberate, nothing like the gentle quakes the region occasionally endures. Authorities first labeled it a low-risk microquake, but within seconds it surged into a violent jolt that tugged at the ancient seams of the land. The epicenter, geologists later confirmed, lay directly beneath the Temple Mount platform, long known for fragile intersections of fault lines, but the shock did not stay there. Instead, as though following a predetermined path, it raced eastward toward the Mount of Olives, as if the ground were tracing the same invisible finger that had already stirred the Euphrates days earlier. The Mount of Olives, typically remembered for its quiet slopes, its olive branches that sway like gentle prayers, did not look gentle this morning. The beloved overlook pathway, where thousands stand to gaze upon Jerusalem's rising gold, was ripped by jagged fractures. Stones that had rested in silence for generations now leaned at broken angles, scattered like fragments of a prophecy waking from its long sleep. Eyewitnesses awake at that hour, pilgrims finishing their prayers, guards on night duty. Elderly residents accustomed to shallow rest spoke with the same trembling certainty. It felt like the ground exhaled, then groaned. Several claimed that the tremor moved directionally, not randomly traveling from the Temple Mount toward the Mount of Olives, a movement chillingly aligned with the pattern of judgment seen in ancient texts. And that startled scholars everywhere, because the Mount of Olives is the very place where Scripture says the earth will one day respond to the Lord's return. Then came the detail no one could ignore. The time, 4:14 a.m. 14:4. Zechariah 14:4 declares, "On that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two." No, the mount did not cleave in half today, but the fractures crawling across its pilgrim road, the cracks threading like veins through limestone, and dust feel like the earliest syllables of a prophecy beginning to breathe. Not fulfillment, but foreshadowing. Not the event itself, but the whisper before the trumpet. Seismologists explained the movement through pressures beneath the Kidron Valley and instability along the East Jerusalem fault. Their models were thorough, their charts precise, but their answers felt strangely hollow, just as the scientists who studied the Euphrates could not fully explain why a river swollen by hail only days earlier could suddenly dry to its bones. Natural explanations existed, but none were complete. Because while experts mapped fault lines deep below the earth, everyday people sensed fault lines deep within their hearts. Historians recalled how the Mount of Olives has hosted divine encounters since the days of David. Rabbis murmured that this mountain has always held a role in the end of the age. Christians remembered that this is where Jesus wept over the city, taught about the last days, and ascended with the promise that he would return in the same manner. So, what are we witnessing? What do we make of a quake that begins beneath the Temple Mount, travels toward the Mount of Olives, and erupts at the very place where prophecy says the earth will one day tremble under the weight of glory? What do we say when its timing 4:14 mirrors the very verse that describes that trembling? What do we do with the unsettling echo between this event and the mystery unfolding at the Euphrates? Both signs not contradicting each other, but harmonizing like warning notes in the same ancient song. For now, we claim only what has happened, but we refuse to dismiss what creation itself has whispered. Tonight, Jerusalem carries wounds that cannot be brushed aside as chance, and the fissures on the Mount of Olives stand in solemn agreement with the dry bed of the Euphrates. The signs are no longer isolated, they are multiplying, and even the earth knows how to tremble when God begins to move. For those who read Scripture as more than literature, the timing and the location cut deeper than stone. In Jerusalem, meaning is never merely topographical, it is layered. And the Mount of Olives, this ridge of ancient prayer and prophecy, has long been the place where the boundary between heaven and earth grows thin. It is the hill where prophets foresaw divine intervention, where the ground itself was said to tremble at the approach of the Lord. So when a rupture tears through its slopes at 4:14 a.m., many cannot help but see the mirrored numbers 14-4 as a quiet, unsettling summons back to Zechariah's vision. Not a claim of fulfillment, but the echo of a verse waking in the dark. Not a conclusion, but a provocation. Even more so when Jerusalem's trembling arrives in the same week as the inexplicable drying of the Euphrates, first swelled by hail, then emptied to its riverbed as if drained by an unseen hand. Two distant regions, two ancient landscapes, each responding in ways that defy tidy explanations. And people are beginning to wonder if the old boundaries between signs have collapsed, if God is speaking not in one place, but in many. Eyewitnesses in Jerusalem describe the aftermath with the same shaken clarity. Roads cracked open, retaining stones shifted. Terraces that have held processions for centuries now marred with fresh wounds. Engineers reported that the damage did not result from shaking alone, but from a shearing, downward movement along the old slope. An ancient scarp awakened. Emergency crews rushed to secure paths, move pilgrims away from exposed tombs, and stabilize historic walkways. Archaeologists catalogued dislodged benches, fallen blocks, fragments of heritage shaken out of place. Early social media posts show new fissures along popular tourist routes unverified, but consistent with what first responders found. And, like the Euphrates, the quake did not strike an empty map. Jerusalem already lives under the weight of tension, military pressures, raids, protests, fragile truces straining at the seams. Within 48 hours of the tremor, headlines were already thick with security alerts and civilian displacements. That convergence, a city stretched politically and spiritually, then shaken physically, has shaped the public imagination in ways no geologist's report can soften. As many see it, natural rupture and human rupture have collided, forming one heavy sign, a summons to attention. From these early reports, two facts stand unmoved. First, a measurable geological event struck the very heart of Jerusalem, the Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives, two places whose significance is older than any earthquake log. Second, its timing and location, when placed beside biblical imagery and the strange convulsions now unfolding at the Euphrates, have given it an extraordinary prophetic weight. Scientists will measure slip vectors, magnitudes, and fault sequences. Historians will map it against the tremors of centuries past. Pastors will hold the cracked stones up to their congregations as living parables. And poets, always the quickest to sense, pattern will speak of fissures that mirror the fractures of the human soul. Yet even here, among the breaks and the dust, light refuses to withdraw. Neighbors passed water along shattered steps. Volunteers marked unstable zones by sunrise. Rescue teams moved through debris with quiet resolve. In a week of two trembling landscapes from the riverbed of the Euphrates to the slopes of Jerusalem, these simple acts of mercy stand as the first countersign against fear. More forensic detail from geologists and the testimonies of witnesses will follow. But for now, hold these images. The cracked stones of the Mount of Olives, the silent riverbed of the Euphrates, two distant witnesses whispering that the signs are no longer confined to one place. They are appearing everywhere. Lately, the subject of the drying up of the river Euphrates has been taught and interpreted this way. The river Euphrates runs through the city of Babylon, and this is indeed true. It does run through the city, and at one time the river was even drained so that Cyrus, the Persian king, and his armies could get in underneath the walls. That was the river Euphrates. And the observation that is being made is that if that was the river that ran through Babylon, and Babylon is a symbol of the papal church, then the drying up of the river Euphrates running through Babylon represents the drying up of the power of the papacy. So, the appreciation of Armageddon and the drying up of the river Euphrates has been presented, in this modern day, as the drying up of the papal power as they want to force their authority over God's people. And the force of their power over God's people is interpreted to be Armageddon. This is the modern teaching of the subject of the river Euphrates and Armageddon. There is much more to it, but I have just given you a quick overview. But when we come to prophecy, the waters of a river, like the waters of the sea, represent a nation or a people. The waters of the sea represent multitudes, and nations, and tongues, and peoples. But a river is something more specific. It is not many nations, it is the nations through which that river runs. We have a very clear representation of that in connection with the king of Assyria, which kingdom later on became Babylon. Isaiah 8-7. Now therefore, behold, the Lord bringeth up upon them the waters of the river, strong and many, even the king of Assyria, and all his glory. And he shall come up over all his channels, and go over all his banks. 8. And he shall pass through Judah. He shall overflow and go over. He shall reach even to the neck. And the stretching out of his wings shall fill the breadth of thy land. O Emmanuel. In this prophecy, a river represents a particular power that comes to conquer, and as it overflows, it conquers Israel. It was the king of Assyria. That is how some people read their Bibles. They correctly appreciated that the seas represent peoples, nations, and tongues, and that a river represents the nation through which it flows. A river, flowing through a country, is taken as a type of the country. Hence, the drying up of the Euphrates would indicate the drying up of the Turkish Empire under the sixth plague. At the time when this was written, the Turkish Empire was the Ottoman Empire, which was the empire of all the Muslim nations that were actually living around that river. As you look at a map, the river Euphrates has its watershed in Turkey and then runs down through the Arab world. So it is Turkey and its associated coalition that is identified by the river Euphrates. History shows that to be the Ottoman Empire, and Turkey was the headquarters of that empire, just like it is the watershed of the river Euphrates. The prophecies of Revelation 9, the 7 trumpets, are the history of the fall of the Roman Empire through the years to our time. The river Euphrates, in that prophecy, represented precisely what we have just seen in reference to chapter 16. Revelation 9:13. And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar, which is before God. 14. saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, Loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. 15. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the third part of men. We see here very vividly that the trumpets represent the wars that were embarked upon to break down the Roman Empire. First, the Western Roman Empire, and then the Eastern Roman Empire. It was done in the Eastern Roman Empire by the Saracens, the Arab world. And here the prophecy points to the river Euphrates and the 4 angels which are bound, the 4 messengers, the 4 leading forces in the river Euphrates. Here is what Uriah Smith said in Daniel and the Revelation regarding those 4 angels. These were the 4 principal sultans, or sultanies, of which the Ottoman Empire was composed, located in the country watered by the great river Euphrates. These sultans were situated at Aleppo, Iconium, Damascus, and Baghdad, the river that makes glad. A lady was leaning over a bridge at Leamington, watching the fresh, sparkling waters of the stream murmuring beneath. Her thoughts turned to Holy Scripture, and she uttered aloud, almost unconsciously, the words of the 46th Psalm, 4th verse. There is a river, the streams whereof make glad the city of God.